The dining room at Iron Creek Lodge felt like a world away from anything I knew, but it was where my family gathered every Thanksgiving Eve. It was all exposed wood beams, oversized leather chairs, and a fireplace crackling like it was trying to prove how much money had been spent to make it feel rustic. Everyone was here: my parents, my brother Brian, his wife Chelsea, and a few of their friends. All of them seemed at ease, like they belonged in this kind of place, while I felt like I was playing dress up. Brian had barely touched his dinner when he turned to me with that smirk he loved so much. "So, what's it like working at that camping store? You still driving that ancient pickup truck?" He chuckled, a little too loud, like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all year. I just shrugged, like I always did. "Yep, still got it. You know how it is. Some of us don't need a new car to feel successful." Mom, soft as always, put a hand on my arm. "Honey, we just hope one day you'll find something more stable for yourself." Stable. The word tasted like chalk in my mouth. I smiled through it, even though it stung more than I let on. Chelsea, of course, had to weigh in. "Maybe you should focus on finding a husband with some real goals," she said, her voice so casual, like she was giving advice on what shade of lipstick to wear. I could feel my face flush, but I just kept the smile plastered on. This was nothing new. For them, I was the underachiever, the one who didn't get it together, the one they were supposed to feel sorry for. I'd heard it all before, and yet it still hurt. The fire crackled behind me, the warmth of it almost feeling like an insult. I wrapped my fingers around my glass of wine, pretending to savor it, but I barely tasted it. Brian had already started up again, his voice louder now, trying to draw everyone in. "So do you think you can afford this whole trip?" He tossed the question out like a challenge, like he already knew the answer. His eyes flicked to the full glass in my hand, like I was somehow pretending to be something I wasn't. I took a long, slow sip, forcing myself to stay calm. "I think I can handle it," I said. "But thanks for worrying." Dad, sensing the tension rising, cleared his throat. "Now, Brian, don't be." "Ray, let him talk," Mom said softly, eyes flicking between Brian and me. "Honey, maybe you could take life a little more seriously," she added, looking at me with a sort of concern I couldn't quite take seriously. Take life seriously. It wasn't even about the money. It was about what they thought I should be doing, as if living the way I wanted wasn't enough. They thought the only kind of serious was what Brian had: his finance job in the city, his sleek suits, the life that ran on dollar signs. "Actually, you know what?" Chelsea piped up, glancing at me like she was offering me a lifeline. "Brian has a contact at a warehouse. Might be able to get you a floor associate job. Not glamorous, but it could help." A floor associate. I tried to keep my face neutral, but the words hit like a slap. It wasn't about the job. It was about what it meant. Their way of seeing me. Not good enough to do anything else, just there to help them fill in the blanks with a low-paying job. I forced a smile, leaning into it like I was genuinely interested. "That's sweet of you, Chelsea. I'll think about it." But I was already planning my escape. My mind was spinning through the possibilities. I'd been quiet long enough. Maybe it was time to change the game, flip it on its head. I'd been keeping quiet because I wasn't sure if I'd ever get this far. But I had, and now it was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. The room behind me started to fill with more people, guests arriving for the weekend. A few familiar faces turned toward me, grinning, and my heart gave a little lurch. "Hey, I know you," one of them called out, walking over. The smile was genuine, warm. It didn't feel like I had to explain myself to them. No judgment in their eyes. "Hi there," I said, giving a quick wave, the corners of my lips tugging upward for real this time. A few more people noticed, and I had to fight the urge to let the relief show too much. I was just a regular person to them. The family didn't even notice, too caught up in their own conversation, too busy with their assumptions. "Well," I said, breaking free from the crowd, "I should take this call." I stood up, smoothing my dress as I did. "Client stuff. Excuse me." I didn't wait for a response. I just turned and walked out. My family wouldn't have cared if I stayed or not. I slipped into my cabin, the door creaking quietly behind me, and the weight of the whole weekend finally hit me. The lodge was beautiful, sure, but it felt like a museum, a display of everything I wasn't. I took a deep breath, shaking off the tension in my shoulders, and walked over to the desk. A couple of family photos sat in frames there, mostly from holidays like this one, full of smiles and perfect poses. I picked up one from years ago, a shot of Brian and me at a family BBQ. I was about 12, awkward and caught in the middle of some joke I didn't understand, while Brian stood next to me, arms slung around my shoulder like he owned me. The picture was supposed to capture a moment of happiness, but all I could see now was how out of place I had felt back then, and how much more I felt it now. I set the photo down and sifted through a stack of old papers, college notes, old projects, a few journals I hadn't touched in years. There, buried beneath all of it, was a letter from my business school acceptance. I had wanted to study business, of course, wanted to be something more than a wandering dreamer, but they didn't see it that way. I could still hear Brian's voice, so sharp and dismissive, from that summer before I started college. Outdoor gear? He had laughed. You're seriously going to go into that? The only companies making money in that space are the big ones. You'll be lucky if you even get an entry-level gig in a warehouse. I had been crushed in that moment, not just by the words, but by the way everyone else agreed with him. Dad, sitting there with his beer in hand, hadn't said much. He never did. But the look in his eyes said it all. Why don't you pick something a little more stable, hun? He'd said. Leave the wilderness to the boys. I hadn't even fought back then. I just swallowed it, shoved it deep down like I always did. That's what I had been doing, shoving it down until I couldn't anymore. It was their judgment, their inability to see me for anything more than their version of successful that pushed me to prove them wrong. So I did it quietly, all on my own. I looked at the folder on the desk now, crammed with documents. My hand lingered over it for a second, hesitant. But there was no going back. Tomorrow I was going to tell them everything. I had to. With a sharp exhale, I opened the folder, straightening the papers inside. The first one was the deed to Iron Creek Lodge, the place they thought of as nothing more than a fancy retreat for their rich friends. My ownership, my name on it, big and bold. Next, I pulled out the incorporation papers for Ridgeline Outfitters, the company I had built from the ground up. They'd have no idea what hit them when they saw it. My name was at the top, founder and CEO. The last sheet was a portfolio, a list of the national parks and professional expeditions using our gear. I took one last look at the pile of papers, my stomach tight, my heart beating faster. Tomorrow. It was time. Time to put all their doubts to rest. Time to show them that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. Time to remind them that I had made my own path, not because I was trying to prove them wrong, but because I was done letting them tell me what I could or couldn't do. I'd done it. I had built something real, something they could never take away from me. And tomorrow, they'd know it. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the same crisp air and low sunlight, the kind that made everything look like it belonged on a postcard. The group split up for activities, some heading out for fly fishing, others opting for a guided hike. I wasn't interested in either. Instead, I joined the gear fitting session, the one where guests get set up with boots, packs, poles, and all the other outdoor paraphernalia they'll probably never use again. The staff here was familiar with me, but still, there was a sort of unwritten understanding that I was an outsider to them, someone who had just wandered in from the outside, maybe for a weekend, and definitely not one of the wealthy guests. But there was a certain comfort in that. They treated me with a quiet respect, even if they didn't know who I really was. And I was fine with that. It meant I didn't have to be on display like the rest of my family, trying to live up to their expectations. I moved easily between the guests, helping them adjust their gear, giving tips on fit and comfort, showing them how to properly lace up boots or use a rod. I knew it all, how it should feel, what to look for in quality equipment, how it should perform out in the wild. There was no hesitancy in my movements, no awkwardness in my voice. I did it with the kind of confidence that comes only from knowing your stuff, and they all appreciated it. Brian, however, was watching. I could feel his eyes on me as he stood off to the side, his arms crossed, like he couldn't figure out why I was here. He was leaning into one of his friends when he made his first comment. Volunteering to help? He called over, loud enough for everyone to hear. Must be to earn a tip. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to poke at me. I smiled, letting it slide like water off a duck's back. Just doing my part, I said, keeping it casual, turning to the next guest, acting like it didn't bother me, even though it did. But I was used to it. And I wasn't about to let him see that it stung. I kept moving, adjusting packs, checking fly rods. And that's when one of the staff members, a young guy who'd been with the lodge for a while, stepped in closer, as if to make sure I knew something. They're ready for your inspection after lunch, he said in a quiet voice. Just enough for me to hear, but no one else. It was one of those little things. No fanfare, just a passing comment, but it hit me hard. My inspection. Like the place was already mine. Like they knew I was the one who called the shots around here. I nodded, holding back the grin that wanted to creep onto my face. It was almost too perfect. Brian didn't hear it, too busy with his latest conversation, but Mom, who had been quietly observing everything, caught it. Her eyes darted from me to the staff member and back again, narrowing just slightly. She said nothing, but I could feel the wheels turning in her head. Maybe she was starting to suspect something, or maybe it was just the way I carried myself that was tipping her off. I worked through the rest of the morning, getting people set up for their adventures, all the while keeping my own plans quiet. Every smile from a guest felt like a reminder of just how far I'd come, away from their judgment, away from their expectations, but I wasn't going to keep hiding forever. Not anymore. Dinner was the same as always. Overcooked turkey, awkward silences, the clink of silverware against plates. Brian was leaning back in his chair, looking smug, as if he was just waiting for an opportunity to make another jab. It didn't take long. "So, you're still doing that gear stuff, huh?" He gestured vaguely, the words dripping with condescension. Maybe you should think about getting into the sales side of it. Not just stacking shelves. I didn't flinch. I had expected this. Brian had always thought of himself as the expert on everything, especially when it came to real jobs. Sales, finance, anything that meant wearing a suit and getting ahead in the way he understood success. He couldn't possibly understand what I'd built. But today, that was about to change. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm, my smile tight. "Funny you mention that," I said, watching his smirk falter just a bit. "I've actually been in gear sales for a while." The words hung there, in the thick air of the room, for a moment longer than they should have. I reached into the folder beside me and pulled out the first document, laying it flat on the table. The sound of paper sliding across the wood was louder than it should have been, like a drumbeat signaling the beginning of something. It was the deed to Iron Creek Lodge. I didn't look at them, didn't need to. I could feel the collective pause. The silence was deafening. Even the clink of silverware stopped, like the world had frozen for a moment. I'd seen that reaction before when people first saw what I'd built. That shock, that disbelief. But for my family, it was a little different. They had no idea what I'd been doing for the last 7 years, not a clue. Brian's face went slack first. His eyes flicked from the document to me, then back to the paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. His eyebrows pulled together, like he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Mom and Dad sat still, but I could feel their confusion too, simmering beneath their shocked expressions. I took a slow breath and let the moment stretch out. Then I slid the next paper out from the folder, keeping my gaze steady on Brian. I put it down gently, like I was handling something delicate. The incorporation papers for Ridgeline Outfitters. The name at the top was mine, founder and CEO. I let that one settle in, watched as Brian's hands twitched, like he was starting to piece it together, but couldn't quite get there. Chelsea's mouth opened, but she didn't speak. She just stared at the papers, like she couldn't decide if she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. Dad's fork hovered over his plate, forgotten. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as if it was trying to process what was happening. And then I pulled out the last sheet, the portfolio of our brand. There it was, in black and white. Ridgeline Outfitters. Gear used in national parks, professional expeditions, by real, actual outdoor experts. I didn't need to say anything. I just let them look at the documents, let them see the proof. It felt like the longest silence I'd ever lived through, the weight of it pressing down on everyone at the table. Finally, Brian broke it. He let out a harsh laugh, trying to cover up the unease I could see creeping across his face. This is a joke, right? He looked at Mom and Dad, like they might somehow confirm that this was all a prank. I shook my head slowly. "No joke, Brian. I've been doing this for about 7 years, and I've owned this lodge for 2. I let that hang there, let it sink in. It wasn't about proving anything to him, but damn, it felt good to finally make them all see the truth." Dad finally spoke, but it was barely more than a mutter. "You own the lodge?" I nodded. "I do." Mom sat there, wide-eyed, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. She didn't say anything. It wasn't the words that mattered anymore. It was the shock, The realization that everything they thought they knew about me had just been flipped upside down. They weren't used to seeing me this way, not like this. Capable, confident, independent. Not the person they'd written off as the underachiever, the one they had to pity. But now, I was showing them something else. A version of me they never bothered to imagine. And somehow, I think they were starting to understand just how much they'd underestimated me. Brian's face twisted, like he couldn't decide whether to laugh or get angry. He glanced around the table, trying to read the room, but no one was looking at him. Mom's hand was still wrapped around her wine glass, but she wasn't holding it steady anymore. Dad's eyes were wide, and he had his fork halfway to his mouth, but forgot what he was doing. No one was moving. Wait, hold on. You're kidding, right? Brian finally sputtered. He laughed again, this time a little more nervously. You really expect us to believe you're this? I didn't smile this time. I'm not kidding, Brian, I said, keeping my voice even. I didn't want to be the one to snap, even though everything in me wanted to. This is what I've been doing. For years, I slid the second document out from the folder, careful not to let my hands shake, though I felt the tension in my chest tighten. Ridgeline Outfitters, incorporation papers, my name at the top as the founder and CEO. The words felt like they had a different weight now, different from the last time I'd signed them. Now they were a statement, a fact. Brian's expression dropped, the mockery gone. His lips parted as if he was going to say something, but he couldn't find the words. Chelsea, sitting beside him, had gone completely silent. Her eyes flicked from the papers to me, back to the papers. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Dad's grip on his wine glass tightened, and he nearly choked on a gulp, eyes bulging as he stared at the page in front of him. He cleared his throat, set the glass down, and rubbed his face like he was waking up from a bad dream. I didn't offer him any comfort, just let him process it. Mom, though, just stared. Her gaze was fixed on the papers, unblinking. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and thick. She had no idea what to say. Neither did anyone else. I pushed the third paper across the table, letting the silence build just a little longer. This one was a brand portfolio, a list of the national parks and professional expeditions we worked with. I watched Brian's eyes flick over the list, the realization creeping in, slow and steady. The weight of the paper seemed to hit him differently than the others. It was all real. Everything he'd dismissed as a pipe dream was now tangible in front of him. Ms. Kane, one of the staff said from the doorway. They didn't even pause to look at Brian or anyone else. The familiarity in the tone made me feel like I had finally stepped into a place where I wasn't just some family member or outcast. I was someone. Brian froze, his face twisting in disbelief. Wait, did they just call you Miss Kane? He asked, voice tight. His eyes flicked from the staff member to me, as if trying to catch me in a lie. I nodded slowly. Yes, they did. My voice was calm, but inside I was buzzing with a mix of pride and something else. Something that felt like vindication, finally. It's what they call me here. Brian didn't know what to say, and I think he knew in that moment that there was no more room for him to mock me. The rules had changed. How long has this been going on? His voice was quieter now, but still incredulous. Like the idea that I could have been doing this without his approval was somehow impossible. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it all sink in. About 7 years. I could feel the room tense as I said it, the words landing like a final hammer in the quiet. But I've owned this place for 2. Brian blinked a few times, like the words weren't fully processing. Mom's gaze never left me, and I saw the shock in her eyes morph into something else. Something I couldn't quite place. You've owned it for 2 years? Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I nodded. Yeah, 2 years. I've been running it just like any other business. I bought it, remodeled it, turned it around. I've done everything you said I couldn't. Brian's jaw tightened. You? He stopped himself, shaking his head as if he was still trying to wrap his mind around it. This whole time, you've been building something. I finished for him. Something real, something I've wanted my entire life. The silence that followed was different now. Not the uncomfortable kind, not the silence that came from them assuming I was the screw-up. No, this was new. This was a silence that came from shock, from disbelief, and somewhere deep inside, I felt a little bit of peace settle into the pit of my stomach. This was my moment. The one where I stopped being the person they pitied and started being the one they had to reckon with. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only validation I needed. Brian's face twisted, like he'd been slapped. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "You deceived all of us," he snapped, his voice rising, raw with anger. "All this time you've been hiding it from the family, and for what? So you could make us all look bad?" I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. "I didn't deceive anyone, Brian," I said, my voice calm but steady. "You never asked. None of you ever asked. Not once." His face flushed with frustration, the veins in his neck popping. "We didn't have to ask. You could have just told us. You could have been honest with us from the start, instead of playing this stupid game." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You were happy to assume I was failing," I said, my words slow but cutting. "You were more comfortable thinking I was some screw-up who couldn't make anything of myself. You didn't want the truth, Brian. You didn't care enough to ask." For a moment, it seemed like he was going to say something else, but he stopped, shaking his head, as if the truth was too much for him to process all at once. Mom shifted in her seat, and I could see the confusion in her eyes, the hurt, but also something else, guilt. She reached for her wine glass again, but her hand trembled. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't know." Her voice cracked, barely a whisper, but it was enough. I didn't look at her. If I did, I might have lost it. "You never knew because I tried over and over again to tell you what I wanted to do," I said, voice thickening. "You just shut me down. Every time. Remember when I wanted to study business in college? Remember when I said I wanted to design outdoor gear? You told me to get a stable job. You told me to leave the wilderness to the boys. Every damn time I tried to bring it up, I was dismissed." The table was silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire outside the room, but even that felt distant. Brian didn't speak. He was too stunned, too angry. Dad hadn't said a word since I told him about the lodge, and now his silence felt like something heavy, pressing down on all of us. "I kept my life private because I wanted to see if you'd respect me," I went on, the weight of it all pushing out in a rush. "I wanted to see if you'd treat me like an equal, even if you thought I was just some failure. But you didn't. You never did. You just kept seeing me as the underachiever, the one who couldn't figure it out, the one who wasn't good enough. And I kept proving you wrong. I didn't need you to know. I didn't need your approval, but I wanted respect. I wanted to see if you could see me for who I really am." My voice faltered at the end, but I didn't take it back. I wasn't going to apologize for it. For the first time, I looked at Mom. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and she was staring at me like she didn't know who I was anymore. It made my chest tighten, but I couldn't stop now. I turned to Brian, whose jaw was clenched tight, the muscles in his neck popping out with the effort to hold it all in. "You wanted me to be someone I'm not, so I did it, on my own. And now I'm done hiding. Done letting you all think you know who I am just because you're more comfortable with the idea of me as some mess-up." A long silence fell over the table after that. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence from before, the kind where no one wanted to speak, but everyone felt it looming. This one was different. It was heavier. It was the silence of realization, of everything finally clicking into place. Brian was still breathing hard, his anger simmering, but no longer burning hot. I could see the frustration in his eyes. He didn't know what to say, how to respond. Mom didn't move, didn't blink. She just sat there, looking like she had just been shown a side of me she never thought existed. Dad, too, was silent, his expression unreadable. And then, in the quiet, it hit me. This wasn't just about them understanding me, it was about them facing the fact that they'd gotten it all wrong. Not only had they underestimated me, but they had never bothered to ask if maybe I wasn't the failure they thought I was. They'd all assumed I'd be the one who stayed stuck, who failed, who needed their pity. But I'd built something without them, without their approval, without their understanding, and now here I was, owning it. All of it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the one thing that could shift the way they saw me. The silence lingered, but it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. The air felt different, still thick with the weight of everything I'd said. But now, maybe, it was more about taking it in, accepting it. I could feel the shift in the room, even if no one had fully spoken yet. The staff brought out dessert then, right on cue, a delicate apple tart, warm from the oven, with a swirl of cinnamon dust that formed a perfect outline of my company's logo. They set it down in front of me, and for a moment, all eyes turned toward it. I didn't know if it was supposed to be some kind of gesture or a celebration, but I felt the sting of their attention. Not because of the tart itself, but because it symbolized everything I had built and what they'd all missed. Dad broke the silence first. His voice was low, a little raspy, like he hadn't spoken much in the past few hours. How how did you do it? He asked, looking directly at me for the first time since I dropped the bomb. How did you build all this? I could feel his curiosity now, a little more respectful than before, but still tinged with disbelief. It wasn't the first time someone had asked me that question, but somehow the weight of it coming from him hit different. I took a breath, letting the calmness settle over me before answering. It wasn't easy, I started, my fingers absently tracing the rim of my glass. I started small. Vendor booths at outdoor expos, making custom gear by hand, selling it online. It wasn't glamorous, just reinvesting profits into better materials, better designs. Slowly, it built. Then, I started acquiring struggling locations like this lodge. It's a lot of work, a lot of risk, but it's worth it. I glanced up, catching Brian's eye. His face had softened, the edge of his anger replaced with something else. Humility, maybe. He was listening now, really hearing me. I wanted to make outdoor life accessible, I continued. I wanted to make it sustainable, something everyone could experience without destroying the places we love. I wasn't just building a brand, I was building a mission. Brian shifted in his seat, his mouth opening like he was about to speak but then hesitating. He cleared his throat before speaking. Could I visit your headquarters sometime? He asked. It wasn't a joke. His tone was genuine, almost like he was admitting defeat, but also trying to connect, in his own way. Sure, I said, giving him a small smile, though I wasn't sure what that would look like, him walking through the doors of Ridgeline. But something told me that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally see things my way, that he was ready to understand. Chelsea, sitting silently beside him, finally spoke. I didn't know. Her voice was soft, quieter than I was used to hearing from her. I guess I really underestimated you. I'm sorry. I nodded, appreciating the apology, even if it didn't change everything. It was a start, though, and I could work with that. Mom, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it, asked in a hesitant whisper, "Can we ever make it right?" The question hung in the air, and I wasn't sure how to answer at first. I looked down at my hands, then back up at them. It was a loaded question, one I didn't have an easy answer for. There was so much history, so much hurt, so many years of me fighting to prove myself. Could they make it right? I finally spoke, my voice steady, though the words felt like they held all of it inside. Start by seeing people for who they are, I said, keeping my gaze on Mom. Not what they own, not what you think they're supposed to be. Just see them. And for the first time, there was no rebuttal. No uncomfortable laughter or dismissive comment. They were listening, really listening. The dessert was forgotten now, the tart sitting untouched in front of me, but I didn't care. What mattered wasn't the food or what they thought of me, but that this moment, the shift, the acknowledgement was happening. And it was enough. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at my desk sipping coffee and sorting through some emails when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something about it felt familiar, so I answered. Hey, it's Brian. His voice came through the line, tentative at first, like he was testing the waters. I paused, caught off guard. Brian, everything okay? Yeah, I wanted to reach out. He cleared his throat. I've taken a leave of absence from the firm. I'm thinking about interning with you. I want to learn about the outdoor business, for real. I know you've been doing this a while and I want to understand it. What it really takes? I sat back, my fingers frozen around my mug. Intern? Brian, who had spent the last few years talking down to me about real jobs, wanted to learn about my world. It took a moment for it to sink in. I wasn't expecting that, I finally said. But sure, we can make it work. I wasn't sure what had made him change his mind, but there was no way I was going to shut him down now. It felt like the right thing to do. Over the next few months, things changed between us. Not just the way we worked together, but the way we talked, the way we saw each other. Brian started to get it, the grind, the risk, the challenge of it all. He wasn't just asking questions anymore. He was getting his hands dirty, putting in the hours, learning what it meant to build something from the ground up. It was strange at first, watching him dive into this world with such commitment, but it felt right. 6 months later, we were featured in an outdoor industry magazine. The photo was of the two of us standing together at the opening of a new trail we had sponsored, our smiles a little more natural now, a little less guarded. The caption read, "Sibling team behind Ridgeline's Rural Revival Initiative." I stared at that photo for a long time when it came in the mail. We looked like a real team, like we had always been on the same side, like there hadn't been years of distance between us. Brian kept a copy of that magazine in his office, framed on the wall next to his desk. It was a small office in a co-working space near the headquarters, but it felt like a victory. He also kept a photo of last Thanksgiving at Iron Creek Lodge on his desk. He had framed it too, right next to the picture of us. I'd caught him staring at it once, his face softening, like he was still trying to figure out how we'd gotten from that night to here. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. Respect wasn't something tied to how much money you made or what kind of job you had. It wasn't something you earned by meeting other people's expectations or by living the life they thought you should. Sometimes you had to own the damn lodge to change the conversation. And sometimes you had to let them see you for who you really were before they could see anything else.